Sometimes the richest person in the room is the one starving for a family, but it took a little girl to see what no one else ever noticed. The grand ballroom shimmered beneath crystal chandeliers, their warm light reflecting across polished marble floors as the city's most powerful business leaders gathered for the annual Children's Charity Gala. Expensive tuxedos, elegant gowns, and quiet conversations filled the air while cameras flashed toward every famous face that entered. Then the room shifted. Charlotte Whitmore had arrived. Billionaire, CEO, America's youngest female Fortune 100 executive. Every conversation paused as people rushed to greet her with polished smiles and rehearsed compliments. She acknowledged them with graceful professionalism, yet her expression never truly changed. She smiled because she had learned that successful people were expected to smile. She thanked donors because successful people always sounded grateful. But behind those calm gray eyes lived a silence that no headline had ever written about. Standing near the back of the ballroom was Ethan Brooks, a hardworking single father who had accepted a last-minute invitation after spending months volunteering with the charity's community repair program. His navy suit wasn't custom-made. His dress shoes had been polished so many times the leather had begun to soften around the edges. Beside him stood his 7-year-old daughter, Lily, wearing a simple pale blue dress she insisted looked like something a princess would wear. Ethan leaned down and whispered, "Remember your manners, sweetheart." Lily nodded, but her attention never left the woman everyone else seemed desperate to impress. She watched Charlotte as people surrounded her with admiration, yet no one stayed longer than a few polite moments before chasing another conversation or another photo. Lily's small fingers wrapped around her father's hand. "Daddy," she whispered softly. Ethan smiled without looking away from the stage. "Yes, sweetheart." Lily continued staring at Charlotte. "She needs a family more than we do." Ethan turned so quickly, he almost dropped the charity program he had been holding. "Why would you say that?" he asked gently. Lily answered with the quiet certainty only children sometimes possess. "Because everyone wants something from her, but nobody is looking at her." Across the ballroom, Charlotte had just finished another carefully rehearsed conversation when those unexpected words drifted through the fading music. She looked toward the little girl. For a brief moment their eyes met. There was no fear in Lily's face, no admiration for money, no curiosity about fame, only simple compassion. Something inside Charlotte shifted so quietly that no one else noticed. The applause began as the evening's master of ceremonies stepped onto the stage, but Charlotte barely heard a word. For the first time in years, one innocent sentence echoed louder than every business victory she had ever celebrated, and before the night was over, she would make a decision that none of the people applauding her success could possibly understand. Charlotte Whitmore had attended hundreds of charity events, accepted countless awards, and shaken thousands of hands, but as her driver guided the black sedan through the quiet streets that night, she found herself staring out the window instead of reviewing tomorrow's schedule. The city lights drifted across the glass, while one simple sentence refused to leave her mind. "She needs a family more than we do." It was an impossible thought. Investors admired her. Employees respected her. Financial magazines celebrated her every achievement. Yet a little girl who had known her for less than 10 seconds had somehow seen beyond every headline. The elevator carried Charlotte to the top floor of her downtown penthouse. The doors opened to perfect silence. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked miles of glittering skyline. Fresh flowers rested on the dining table exactly where her housekeeper had arranged them. A gourmet dinner waited untouched beneath polished silver covers. Everything was beautiful. Everything was immaculate. Everything felt empty. Charlotte walked past the dining room without taking a single bite and paused beside a framed photograph of her parents taken years before they had passed away. She brushed a finger across the frame before quietly whispering, "Would you even recognize this life?" The question disappeared into the stillness. Across town, Ethan Brooks unlocked the front door of their modest 2-bedroom house. Lily kicked off her shoes and hurried into the kitchen. "Can we make pancakes tomorrow?" she asked with a grin. Ethan laughed softly. "Tomorrow is Saturday. I think we can manage that." She climbed onto a chair while he warmed tomato soup left over from the night before. The kitchen smelled of fresh bread and herbs. The old clock ticked steadily above the refrigerator. It was not a luxurious home, but every room carried signs of life. Family photos covered the hallway. Crayon drawings decorated the refrigerator. A half-finished puzzle waited on the coffee table. Ethan noticed Lily becoming unusually quiet. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. She stirred her soup with slow circles before answering. "The lady from tonight." Ethan smiled gently. "Charlotte." Lily nodded. Everybody smiled at her, but nobody smiled because they loved her. Ethan looked down at his bowl. Children sometimes said things adults spent years trying to understand. "Maybe she has people who care about her," he replied. Lily shrugged. "Maybe, but I do not think anyone is waiting for her to come home." Ethan could not answer. The next morning, Charlotte canceled a private golf meeting that had been scheduled for months. Her executive assistant stared in surprise as Charlotte requested something far more unusual. She wanted to personally visit one of the community projects her foundation had funded years earlier. The location happened to be the same neighborhood where Ethan volunteered every Saturday repairing playground equipment for local families. Charlotte told herself it was simply another routine inspection. Yet somewhere beneath that carefully practiced confidence, she knew she was hoping to see one little girl again. Because for the first time in many years, success no longer felt like the most important thing she had been searching for. Saturday morning arrived with clear blue skies and the gentle warmth of early spring. The neighborhood playground buzzed with cheerful voices as children climbed ladders, chased one another across the grass, and laughed beneath bright red slides that had seen better days. Ethan Brooks tightened the final bolt on a loose park bench before wiping his hands with a well-worn work cloth. Volunteering had become part of his weekly routine years earlier. He always believed that if a child found one safe place to laugh, the entire community became a little stronger. Lily skipped across the playground carrying a small paper bag filled with homemade chocolate chip cookies they had baked together that morning. She stopped beside every volunteer, offering each person a cookie with the same bright smile. "Daddy says kindness is better when you share it," she told an elderly man repainting a picnic table. Ethan chuckled from across the playground. "I also said you should save a few for yourself." Lily laughed. "There are plenty." The quiet rhythm of the morning changed as several black vehicles rolled slowly toward the community center. They were polished, elegant, and impossible to ignore in a neighborhood where pickup trucks and family sedans filled most driveways. People exchanged curious glances while a few local organizers hurried toward the parking lot. Charlotte Whitmore stepped out wearing simple jeans, white sneakers, and a light blue sweater instead of the tailored business suits the public usually associated with her. Without photographers or television cameras surrounding her, she looked less like the woman who appeared on magazine covers and more like someone hoping not to be noticed. Her foundation director approached with a folder full of reports. "We have 6 locations scheduled today," he reminded her politely. Charlotte looked past the paperwork toward the laughter echoing across the playground. "Let us start here," she replied. Ethan noticed the visitors, but returned to tightening another loose railing. To him, every child waiting to use the playground mattered more than any executive inspection. Charlotte watched him quietly for several moments before walking closer. "You repaired all of this yourself?" she asked. Ethan looked up with a friendly smile. "Not by myself. Good neighbors make big jobs smaller." Charlotte nodded thoughtfully. "Most people would wait for someone else to fix it." Ethan shrugged. Children should not have to wait for adults to do the right thing. Before Charlotte could answer, a familiar little voice interrupted. "I knew you would come back." Lily ran toward her holding the last cookie in the paper bag. Charlotte blinked in surprise. "You remembered me?" Lily smiled as if the answer were obvious. "Of course. I saved this one because I thought you might still be lonely." For a moment, Charlotte simply stared at the cookie resting in Lily's small hand. No board member had ever offered her something so simple. No business partner had ever expected nothing in return. She accepted it carefully. "Thank you," she whispered. Lily tilted her head. "You smiled for real that time." Charlotte felt something warm rise behind her eyes, while Ethan stood silently nearby, realizing that whatever had begun at the charity gala had quietly followed them into the ordinary beauty of a neighborhood playground, where a child continued to see truths that the rest of the world seemed determined to overlook. The visit was supposed to last 15 minutes, but nearly an hour passed before Charlotte Whitmore glanced at her watch. Her foundation director quietly reminded her that 3 more community projects were waiting across the city. Charlotte closed the folder he had handed her without reading another page. "Please reschedule the rest," she said calmly. The director blinked in surprise. All of them. Charlotte nodded. Yes. I would rather understand one neighborhood than simply drive past 6. As the executive team stepped away to make hurried phone calls, Ethan finished replacing the final wooden board on the playground bridge. He stood, stretched his back, and smiled as children immediately rushed across the freshly repaired walkway, their laughter filling the crisp afternoon air. Looks like you have your first inspection, Charlotte said with a gentle smile. Ethan watched the children race from one side to the other. Children are the toughest inspectors in the world. If something is not safe, they find out before adults do. Charlotte laughed softly, and the sound surprised even her. It was natural, unplanned, and completely different from the practiced laugh she offered during corporate dinners. Lily skipped toward them carrying a handful of sidewalk chalk. Do either of you know how to draw butterflies? She asked. Ethan smiled. You already know I cannot draw. Lily turned hopefully toward Charlotte. What about you? Charlotte hesitated before kneeling beside the sidewalk. I have not drawn one since I was about your age. Lily handed her a blue piece of chalk. Then today is a good day to start again. Charlotte slowly sketched uneven wings across the pavement. They were far from perfect, but Lily clapped anyway. See? She just needed someone to ask. Ethan watched the exchange quietly. There was something remarkable about how naturally his daughter erased the invisible distance that usually separated powerful people from everyone else. No introductions. No status. No expectations. Only kindness. As the afternoon faded into golden light, families began packing picnic baskets and folding lawn chairs. Charlotte prepared to leave, but Lily tugged gently on her sleeve. Will you come back next Saturday? Charlotte looked toward Ethan before answering. Only if your father does not mind. Ethan smiled politely. It is a public playground. Everyone is welcome. Charlotte noticed that he had chosen his words carefully. He was kind, but cautious. He treated her exactly as he treated every other volunteer, never trying to impress her or gain favor because of her wealth. That quiet dignity intrigued her more than any polished executive she had met in years. On the drive back downtown, Charlotte remained silent while the skyline slowly appeared beyond the windshield. Her assistant finally asked, was the visit successful? Charlotte looked out at families walking together along quiet neighborhood sidewalks. Parents carried groceries. Children rode bicycles. Front porches echoed with ordinary conversations. She answered with unexpected honesty. Today I realized I have spent years building places where people work together, but I have forgotten how people simply live together. At that very moment, Ethan tucked Lily into bed after another ordinary evening filled with homework, pancakes for dinner, and bedtime stories. Before closing her eyes, Lily smiled and whispered, Daddy. I think she smiled because somebody finally treated her like she belonged somewhere. Ethan kissed her forehead and quietly turned off the bedroom light, never imagining that the simplest acts of ordinary family life had already begun changing the heart of the most successful woman in the city. Over the next several weeks, Saturday mornings quietly became something Charlotte Whitmore protected more carefully than any board meeting on her calendar. She still led billion-dollar negotiations from Monday through Friday, but every weekend she found herself driving across town with no security detail, no media announcement, and no expectation except spending a few peaceful hours where people cared more about broken swings than quarterly earnings. Ethan noticed the pattern long before he mentioned it. Charlotte always arrived carrying something useful instead of something expensive. One Saturday, it was gardening gloves for the volunteers. Another weekend, she brought flower seeds for the children to plant beside the playground. She never tried to take charge. She simply joined the work. Lily accepted her presence as though she had always belonged there. Come on, Lily called one morning while holding 2 small watering cans. The flowers are thirsty. Charlotte smiled and followed her toward the newly planted garden. How do you know which ones need more water? She asked. Lily shrugged. You just pay attention. Flowers cannot talk, but they still tell you. Charlotte looked down at the tiny blossoms pushing through the dark soil. She wondered how many silent things in life she had stopped noticing years ago. Ethan was repairing a picnic table nearby when one of the neighborhood volunteers leaned closer with a friendly grin. Your little girl has adopted another family member. Ethan laughed softly without looking up. Lily has never believed kindness comes with limits. Charlotte heard the conversation and lowered her eyes, unsure whether she deserved to be included in those words. Later that afternoon, the Three of them stopped at a small neighborhood ice cream shop after finishing the volunteer work. The place was simple, with faded booths, cheerful music, and handwritten specials on a chalkboard. Nobody seemed to recognize the billionaire sitting beside a single father and his daughter. For the first time in years, Charlotte was grateful for being ordinary. Lily happily sampled 3 flavors before choosing strawberry. Ethan ordered vanilla. Charlotte hesitated over the menu. "I have not had ice cream in years," she admitted. Lily looked genuinely shocked. "Years?" Charlotte nodded with an embarrassed smile. Work became busy. Lily frowned. "People are busier than ice cream?" Ethan could not help laughing. Even Charlotte laughed until tears gathered in the corners of her eyes. The waitress smiled warmly as she placed 3 cones on the table. "Looks like somebody is having a good day." Charlotte quietly answered, "I think I finally am." Yet while joy quietly found its place around that little table, another story was beginning somewhere else. Across downtown, a freelance photographer reviewing pictures from the community playground recognized Charlotte in the background beside Ethan and Lily. The images quickly found their way to an entertainment editor searching for the next headline involving the city's most eligible billionaire. By Monday morning, several gossip websites published photographs of Charlotte smiling beside the single father and his daughter. The articles did not mention playground repairs or volunteer work. Instead, they asked bold questions about a mysterious relationship. Employees whispered in elevators. Television commentators speculated during business programs. Investors began making uncomfortable phone calls. Sitting alone in his modest kitchen before leaving for work, Ethan stared at the headlines on his old laptop and slowly closed the screen. He looked toward Lily finishing her cereal at the table and quietly realized that the peaceful Saturdays they had shared might soon become far more complicated than any of them had imagined. By Tuesday morning, the headlines had grown louder than anyone expected. Television anchors debated whether Charlotte Whitmore's recent charity visits were heartfelt or carefully planned public relations. Business blogs questioned why one of the nation's most influential chief executive officers kept appearing beside an unknown single father. Social media filled with guesses from people who knew nothing about either of them. Inside the glass conference room at Whitmore Global, the atmosphere felt colder than usual. Members of the board exchanged uneasy glances before one senior director finally spoke. "Charlotte, perception matters. Investors are calling. They want reassurance that your personal decisions will not affect the company." Charlotte folded her hands calmly. "Visiting a community project funded by our own foundation is not a personal scandal." Another executive cleared his throat. "It is not the volunteer work that concerns them. It is the repeated photographs with the same man and his daughter." The room became still. Charlotte looked around the long polished table. Every face reflected concern about stock prices, public image, and quarterly performance. Not one person asked whether she was happy. She quietly realized that Lily had been right. Plenty of people noticed what she represented. Almost nobody noticed who she was. Across town, Ethan finished repairing an aging pickup truck at the neighborhood garage where he worked. His longtime co-worker, Mike Dawson, held up his phone with an uneasy expression. "You have seen this, have you not?" Ethan nodded before Mike even turned the screen around. "I saw it this morning." Mike lowered the phone. "You know how people are. They are going to assume the worst." Ethan sighed softly while placing his tools back into their drawer. "That is exactly what worries me." He was not worried about himself. He had lived through difficult seasons before. What troubled him was the thought that Charlotte's reputation might suffer simply because she had been kind to an ordinary father and his little girl. That evening, Charlotte drove to the neighborhood playground, hoping the familiar place might quiet the noise surrounding her life. The swings moved gently in the evening breeze. Children chased one another beneath the orange glow of the setting sun. Ethan was replacing a loose board near the sandbox, while Lily carefully watered the flowers they had planted together weeks earlier. Charlotte walked toward them with a tentative smile. Before she could say hello, Ethan gently removed his work gloves and met her halfway across the grass. His expression remained warm, but there was sadness in his eyes. "Charlotte," he said quietly, "I think people are starting to misunderstand what this friendship really is." She looked down for a moment before answering. "I know." Ethan took a slow breath. "You have worked too hard to build everything you have. I do not want my family becoming the reason someone questions your integrity." Charlotte immediately shook her head. "You are not the problem. Ethan smiled with quiet dignity. Maybe not. But sometimes doing the right thing means stepping away before someone else gets hurt. Charlotte searched his face, hoping he would change his mind, but she could already sense the distance he was trying to create. Behind them, Lily looked up from the flower bed, watching the two adults standing silently beneath the fading evening light, and for the first time since they had met, she felt that something precious was beginning to slip away. The following Saturday arrived with an unfamiliar quiet. The playground still echoed with children laughing, parents chatting, and bicycles rolling along the winding paths, but something important was missing. Charlotte Whitmore never came. Lily looked toward the parking lot every few minutes before returning to help her father tighten bolts on a wooden bench. Finally, she asked the question Ethan had been hoping to avoid. "Do you think she forgot?" Ethan forced a gentle smile. "Charlotte has a very important job. Sometimes important people have difficult schedules." Lily lowered her head. She still would have said goodbye. Ethan did not answer because he feared she was right. Across the city, Charlotte stood inside another executive board meeting, surrounded by polished wood walls, glowing presentation screens, and charts predicting another record-breaking year. Voices discussed acquisitions, international expansion, and shareholder confidence, but the words drifted past her without meaning. One director smiled proudly. "Congratulations. The market responded well after you stepped back from unnecessary public attention." Charlotte remained silent. Another executive added, "This is exactly the focus investors expect." Charlotte glanced through the glass wall overlooking the skyline. She had protected the company exactly as everyone wanted, yet she felt as though she had abandoned something infinitely more valuable than a quarterly report. When the meeting finally ended, she returned to her office and noticed a small paper bag resting on her desk. Her assistant smiled softly. "A little girl dropped this off yesterday while you were in Chicago. She insisted it was only for you." Charlotte carefully opened the bag. Inside was a single crayon drawing. Three people stood beneath a bright blue sky, holding hands beside a playground covered with colorful flowers. On the back, written in careful childlike letters, were the words, "I saved your flower because I knew you would come back." Folded beside the drawing was a tiny pressed yellow blossom from the garden they had planted together. Charlotte sat down slowly, holding the fragile flower as though it were made of glass. For several long moments, she simply cried. Not because of the headlines, not because of the board, but because somewhere along the way she had become so afraid of protecting her public image that she had disappointed the one child who had never cared about her title. That evening, Ethan found Lily sitting quietly beside the little flower bed at the playground. The yellow blossoms were beginning to bloom despite the changing weather. "Daddy," she whispered, "do flowers stop growing if people forget about them?" Ethan knelt beside her and gently brushed a leaf away from one of the stems. "No, sweetheart. If the roots are strong, they keep growing even when nobody is watching." Lily looked thoughtfully at the flowers before smiling just a little. "Then maybe people are like that too." Ethan nodded, although he was not certain he believed his own words anymore. At that exact moment, several miles away, Charlotte placed the drawing into her purse, canceled every meeting on her schedule for the following day, and quietly made a decision that would surprise her board, challenge everything she had spent years building, and force her to choose between protecting an empire and protecting the first genuine connection her heart had felt in a very long time. The next morning, the headquarters of Whitmore Global buzzed with unusual anticipation. Executives hurried through marble hallways carrying tablets, financial reports, and presentation folders for what everyone expected to be the most important merger meeting of the year. Billions of dollars depended on the outcome. Television crews had already gathered outside the building, convinced another historic business announcement was only hours away. Charlotte Whitmore stepped into the boardroom wearing the same calm expression she had perfected over years of leading one of the country's largest companies. The directors greeted her with confident smiles. One of them stood and proudly announced, "Everything is ready. Once you approve the final documents, the agreement can be signed before noon." Charlotte slowly looked around the room. Every chair was filled. Every screen displayed impressive numbers. Every person expected another victory. Yet all she could think about was a crayon drawing folded inside her purse and a little girl who believed nobody should have to come home to an empty house. She gently closed the presentation folder in front of her. The quiet sound echoed through the room. "We are postponing today's signing," she said. Silence settled over the table. Several executives exchanged confused glances. "Postponing?" one director repeated. "This deal has taken 18 months to negotiate." Charlotte nodded. "I know." Another board member leaned forward. "May we ask why?" She answered with complete honesty. "Because I have spent too many years believing success could replace the things that actually matter." Nobody spoke. They had prepared for difficult negotiations, not personal truth. Charlotte stood, gathered only her purse, and walked toward the door. "Reschedule the meeting for another day. The company will survive one afternoon without me." Before anyone could respond, she was already gone. 40 minutes later, her car quietly pulled into the familiar neighborhood where children were gathering for another weekend at the community playground. Ethan was loading tools into the back of his aging pickup truck while Lily carefully packed boxes from the small flower garden. Ethan looked surprised when he saw Charlotte walking toward them. "What happened?" he asked gently. Charlotte smiled, though her eyes glistened with emotion. "For once, I chose people before paperwork." Lily ran across the grass and hugged her without hesitation. Charlotte knelt to embrace her, holding the little girl a little longer than usual. Ethan watched quietly, sensing how much courage that simple moment had required. After a long silence, Charlotte looked at him. "I cannot promise life will become easier after today," Ethan answered with his familiar calm. "The worthwhile things rarely are." Lily reached into her backpack and pulled out 3 paper cups with bright crayons taped to each one. "I brought lemonade," she announced proudly. "Families should not have important conversations while they are thirsty." Ethan laughed. Charlotte laughed with him, and together they sat beneath the shade of the old maple tree, drinking homemade lemonade while children played nearby. No reporters followed them. No cameras interrupted the moment. Only birdsong, warm afternoon sunlight, and the gentle feeling that something far more valuable than a business agreement had quietly begun to grow between 3 hearts that were no longer quite as lonely as they had once been. 1 year passed more quietly than anyone could have imagined. The headlines that once chased Charlotte Whitmore had faded into yesterday's news, replaced by newer stories and newer controversies. Whitmore Global remained successful, proving that one postponed meeting had never been the company's greatest strength. Its greatest strength had always been the character of the woman leading it. Yet Charlotte herself had changed in ways that could never be measured by annual reports. Saturday mornings were still reserved for the neighborhood playground. The flower garden had grown into a colorful border surrounding the walking path, and every child who visited knew exactly who had helped plant it. Ethan Brooks still repaired broken benches, tightened loose bolts, and quietly volunteered wherever someone needed an extra pair of hands. Charlotte often worked beside him wearing gardening gloves instead of designer watches. Nobody there cared about her title. They simply knew she always showed up. Lily had grown a little taller, but her smile remained exactly the same. One bright spring afternoon, her elementary school hosted an art exhibition for families. The classroom walls were covered with paintings of favorite vacations, pets, birthday parties, and dream houses. Parents wandered from picture to picture, proudly searching for their children's artwork. Ethan and Charlotte stood side by side as Lily hurried toward a large drawing hanging near the center of the room. "This one is mine," she said with unmistakable excitement. Across the top of the page, written in careful blue letters, was the title, "My Family." The picture showed 3 people holding hands beneath a wide maple tree beside a playground filled with flowers. One person wore work boots. Another wore a blue sweater. Between them stood a little girl with a bright yellow butterfly flying overhead. There were no tall office buildings, no luxury cars, no symbols of wealth, only smiles. Charlotte felt her eyes fill with tears. "Lily," she whispered, "are you sure?" Lily looked at her with complete innocence. "Families are the people who keep coming back." Ethan rested a gentle hand on Charlotte's shoulder. Neither of them spoke for several moments because some truths become smaller when spoken aloud. The classroom continued buzzing with cheerful conversation while sunlight poured through the tall windows, warming the colorful drawings covering every wall. In that ordinary room, surrounded by crayons, construction paper, and children's laughter, Charlotte finally understood what years of success had never been able to teach her. A house becomes a home because someone is waiting inside. A fortune becomes meaningful only when it is shared with people who love you, without asking for anything in return. As they walked outside together, Lily reached for both of their hands without thinking, and they instinctively reached back. No photographers captured the moment. No reporters announced it. The world continued moving exactly as before. Yet for three ordinary hearts, everything had changed. Sometimes the greatest miracle is not finding more money, more success, or more recognition. Sometimes the greatest miracle is discovering that the family you have been searching for has quietly been walking beside you all along, waiting for you to notice.